allow me to explain why we read so much this morning. I know you wonder, why in the world did Pastor have us read all those long passages? The lectionary passage assigned for today is John chapter 9, verses 141. That's the healing that we know about the unnamed man who had been blind from birth. It's a well-known lesson from John's gospel, well known to those of us who are familiar with the ministry of Jesus. And the words that Jesus shared about being the good shepherd we find in John 10 are also well known. However, the passages usually are not considered together. So you're wondering, Pastor, what's up? We consider them together today because Jesus doesn't end the teaching at chapter 9:41. The teaching doesn't end at verse 41. Actually, the teaching ends at verse 21 of chapter 10. The words we read at John 10, 121 are his interpretation, are the Jesus commentary on the healing of the blind man. The healing of the blind man was a sign that Jesus is the Messiah. And the commentary Jesus gave afterward helps us interpret the meaning of that sign. But remember, what was really going on in this passage was a big dispute, a big controversy about whether or not this healing was from God. That was the big deal. But I'm getting ahead of myself, aren't I? Too excited. Now I'll summarize the narrative to help you understand why I titled this sermon, Looking for Leadership. John 9 begins by narrating that the disciples of Jesus ask at verse 2, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And at verse 3, Jesus replied, neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. Remember that. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. Remember that. He was born blind so that what? God's works might be revealed in him. Okay, remember that, because I told you the big controversy is whether or not the man's healing is from God or not. That's the big controversy. Everything that happens after the man's healing is about the controversy. Shortly after that, Jesus spat on the ground, made a salve from the mud, placed the salve on the man's eyes. You know the story. Instructed the man to go wash in the pool of Siloam. The man was obedient, went and washed. And John 9:7 says he came back able to see. And everything we read after that, everything after that man was liberated from blindness, blessed with sight, involves how various aspects of leadership interacted with that man and argued among themselves about whether or not that man, what happened to that man, was God's work or not. In other words, folks started fussing about whether God had been working. When a man who had been blind all his life gained his sight. And the rest of the 9th chapter is about the big fuss. They arguing. This is God work. No, it's not God work. But we really don't know whether this is the right man or not. And we don't know who he is. So let's go ask him. Let's ask him what happened to him. And then let's make him tell us. Let's ask him who did it. Oh, it happened on the Sabbath. So it can't be God's work, because God wouldn't work that way. We got this rule. Nobody works on the Sabbath. And God got to follow our rule. Hello? Some folks don't believe God can't work unless God works. according to their rules. And so they had a real issue. They had a real issue with this brother who shows up healed of blindness from birth on the Sabbath because it doesn't square with their rule. And then they ask, and then some folks who had known the man all his life, all of a sudden didn't know they know the man. They weren't sure this is really the right dude. Remember, Jesus told his disciples the man's blindness was there so that God's work could be revealed. Jesus didn't ask the man, do you want me to heal you? This is not a situation where folks stand around, hey, Jesus, here's a blind man, come heal him. The man's parents didn't bring him to Jesus and say, our son's been blind all his life. Would you please heal him? As far as John's gospel is concerned, we don't even have any conversation between Jesus and the man until Jesus tells the man to go wash. Now, that doesn't mean there wasn't any conversation. It just means that the writers of the John's gospel say, hey, this is not the important thing. No, you don't get caught up in the dialogue. Make sure you stay with the main thing. The main thing is man blind from birth. Man blind from birth. Jesus sees man blind from birth. Jesus heals man blind from birth. Doesn't ask man, doesn't ask man's mama, doesn't ask man's daddy, doesn't ask the religious people, doesn't ask neighbors. Jesus heals the man blind from birth. Man blind from birth gets healed by doing what Jesus says. Man blind from birth comes back and everybody goes crazy. We don't know him. Well, yeah, he is he. Yeah, we don't know that. Well, it's not really he. He just looks like the fellow we used to know. I mean, that's in the text, right? And so they're arguing. The neighbors, the friends who've known this man all their life are arguing among themselves. The man's already looking at them. The first time he's ever seen these people. And they're having an argument about who he is. I mean, he's happy to see, and they are arguing with each other, and now going to start fussing with him. Well, who really healed you? And are you really who you are? Are you really who you are? He said, yeah, I'm the person you've always known. Isn't it interesting that some people only know us by the things that oppress us? Some folks cannot recognize us if we are not living in the oppression in which they've always known us. And if God delivers us out of the oppression, they go crazy. They can't figure out, who is this? Couldn't really be. No. I knew you when. I knew you when. No. No. I remember. You are not the same person I used to know. And so therefore, you can't be who you say you are, because I know who you used to be, and you don't act like, you don't look like. Hello? John 9, right there. Arguing with each other. And then they start arguing with him. Well, if you're really who you is, tell us who healed you. I told you. Jesus, what did he do? He spat on the ground. He made some mud. He put the mud on my eyes. He told me to go wash in the pool of Siloam, and I did it. So they don't like what the man tells them, so they take him to the religious police. This is the Griffin paraphrase. But they took him to the religious police. They took him to the church folks. You know, when we don't think folks are doing right, we take him to the folks who we say, he either crazy, hello, or he needs to be locked up, or he needs to be interrogated. We take him to be interrogated by the religious authorities, and the religious authorities then lock in on him. This happened to you on the Sabbath day? Yeah. Who did this? Jesus. What did he do? How many times I tell the story? spat on the ground. He made some mud, put the mud on my eyes, told me to go wash in the pool of Siloam. I went and washed the pool of Siloam. I came back seeing. That man must be a demon, because nobody from God would do that on the Sabbath. The religious police, okay? Church folk, preacher folks, reverend, sister, missionary, evangelist, deaconess, pillar of the church folk. Hello? Folks who've been in the church long enough to have a name on a pew. Folks who say, hey, I know the Lord because I've been in here I was here when they organized this thing. Hello? And so, no, the Lord ain't never worked this way before. 7 last words of church. It never has happened like this before. And so they say, no, you can't be telling the truth. So then they accuse the man of lying. We're going to ask your mom and daddy. That's the reason why they ask mom. Because if they find out that the man is lying, they're going to do something to him. So it's find mom and daddy, bring mom and daddy in the church. This guy's in the church now. This is a church man, okay? He's been blind. He's been in the church. The church knows him. He's been the blind beggar of the church. Hello? Let's find his mama and daddy and ask them. Yeah, that's our boy. Mama said, yeah, that's my baby. That's my boy, daddy says. Yeah, he's blind. He was blind from the first time he came into the world. He's grown now. He was blind as a boy. He's blind as a teenager. He's blind as a grown man. He's been blind all his life. But now he see. Now how he get to be in seeing, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know who healed him. And then the religious police say, well, do you think it was God doing it? No, don't ask us that. I don't know who healed him. Now, back up for a second. If you had a child who had been blind from birth, and all of a sudden this child and this grown person is able to see, wouldn't you be saying, thank the Lord? Hello? I don't know how he got to be sighted, but I would be saying, thank the Lord. But they won't do holy dance. They do not want to have a happy dance for the Lord because they're scared of being put out of the church. Because, see, in that church, God doesn't work on the Sabbath day. You understand? In that church, in that system, God can't do nothing on the Sabbath day. And so if they say that God has healed their child who they haven't seen be healed, then they run the risk of being put out of church. I wonder if anybody hears me. Sometimes we are oppressed not only by the systems in us, sometimes we are oppressed by systems around us, to include religious systems. Sometimes religious systems oppress us. The man was more oppressed by the church folk after he gained his sight than he was by his blindness. And his mama and daddy were more scared of the church folk than they were interested in praising God. Some of us can't praise God because we're scared of what folks on the pews going to do. Some of us can't live for God because we're afraid folks on the pews may. There are some people who are afraid to say God loves everybody just because I'm afraid that some of the church folks won't think that God loves some of the folks that God loves, because we don't think God loves folks that act that way. Amen. A lot of folks didn't think God loved gay folks, bisexual folks, transgender folks. And a lot of us will, to be honest, stayed in churches because we're afraid of what other folks would think. Hello? Blind man standing there looking at folks, trying to figure out what in the world is going on. I've been blind all my life, and the first day I wake up seeing, folks are fussing about whether or not my sight is a blessing from God. This is day one of seeing. And he's in the middle of an argument, a theological argument of whether God will heal on the Sabbath day. He's over there. And Mom and Daddy won't stand up for him now. So Mom and Dad said, ask him. And then Mom and Dad sit back on that pew. And now all of a sudden the attention's back on him. And the church police say, well, you tell us. How did you get... I have told you. I have told you. The man named Jesus spat on the ground. He made mud from the spit, and he put the mud on my eyes and told me to go wash in the pool of Siloam. I went and did what he said, and I gained my sight. Now I have told you and told you and told you. Why do you keep asking me? Now let me give you the Griffin paraphrase. Because see, the Griffin paraphrase is, you about to wear the fire to me. I'm about to get tired of this. I told Mama, I told Daddy, I told neighbors, I told the church folk the same thing. Everybody knows I'm telling the same story. This is not how many times can we interrogate him before he changes his story. There is no different story. I haven't had a personality change. I'm not a different person. There is only one story. I was blind. I don't know. Lesson point. You don't have to have an encyclopedia knowledge of God to know what God has done for you. You don't have to be able to explain God and able to give God credit for what God has done for you. How many of you could explain how you were born when you were 5 years old? You still knew who your parents were, didn't you? Hello? You didn't know a first thing about human reproduction, but you knew you were somebody's child. And that happens to us in faith life. Folks say, if you can't explain exactly all the details about what God is doing, it must not. No. Life doesn't work that way. Truth doesn't work that way. None of us have the final word on God. All God gives us is clues that God is working. What did Jesus say? Neither him sin nor his parents sin, but he was blind so that God's work could be revealed. The man was seeing, and God's work was standing up. God's work was looking at people. God's work was saying, I am God's work. My healed eyes are God's work. My sight is God's work. I'm aggravated at you looking at me because I see you through God's work. And it's aggravating to me because you worrying me and trying to get me to deny that God has worked in me. Don't you let people make you into a lie and make you think that God hadn't worked in you because they can't buy it. Don't you let folks put you in a trick saying that just because I don't understand how God did it, God must not have done anything. That's their problem. If they're knuckleheads, let them be knuckleheads. I know that's not a biblical word. But understand, he was dealing with some moral and social and theological knuckleheads. Well, how do we... So they put him out of the church. They put him out of the church. Don't act surprised. We put folks out of the church who act like God has done something for them that we don't understand. Hello? We back up from them. And sometimes, let's just be honest, the best thing that can happen to those folks is get put out of the church. Notice, the best thing that happened to that man was getting put out of the church. After he got put out of the church, Jesus found him. Jesus didn't find him in the synagogue. And the synagogue folks weren't willing to give Jesus credit for healing him. It was after he got put out of the synagogue that Jesus found him. It was after he got put out of synagogue that he understood who Jesus was. He'd only heard Jesus' voice. You understand? When he received his sight, Jesus was somewhere else. He heard his voice. He felt his hands. He knew he spat on the ground, but he'd never seen Jesus. Hello? Sometimes we have to hear before we know. We have to hear before we see. We have to hear before we understand. We know in part. We understand in part. And God builds on the parts. We don't get it all in one time. Actually, I don't think we can handle it all in one time. Have you ever thought about could you imagine if God, when you were a baby, filled you with all you know now? Your head would blow up. Boom! I mean, if we understood all we understood about life at the first time we encountered life, we would be crazy. God has to build in us. And Jesus touched him. Jesus spoke to him. Then Jesus found him. And then Jesus enlightened him. Do you know who the Son of Man is? No, sir. But I sure would like to. If you'll tell me who he is, I want to find out who he is so I can believe in him. Understand, the man had got put out of the religious system. All the leaders that had ever been in his life, the leaders in his blind life, had put him out, had argued with him about his sightfulness. And for the first time in his life, he is leaderless. He's looking for a leader. All the folks who, his parents led him and they put him out. Won't speak up for him. His friends don't want anything to do with it. The church folks put him out. And for the first time, he's leaderless. And Jesus finds him. Do you know who did this? No. Do you know who the Son of Man is? No. But show me so I can believe in him. So there are people who are just waiting for Jesus to be introduced to them through God's work in their lives so that they can believe. And unfortunately, sometimes the church is the biggest hindrance to them believing. I actually remember church folks saying the internet was the work of the devil. I remember that. I mean, I'm not the only one who said that. Who remember that, okay? I remember church folks arguing about using fax machines. I remember church folks arguing about having telephones. I remember church folks arguing about having indoor baptistries. Amen. Church folk, hello? standing in the way of God being praised, affirmed. Let me come to the end of this little lesson. This is how we get to I am the good shepherd. Because the man needs a shepherd. He has been led all his life by people who are not shepherds. They are people who simply used him. They used his blindness. They identified him by his blindness. They knew him by his disability. As long as he was dependent on them, they knew him. But when he gained his sight, they had problems identifying him. They had problems relating to him. And therefore, because they could not run his life, they had no use for him. Yeah, that happens in the church. Yeah, that happens in the church. Notice, this did not happen on Wall Street. This didn't happen in the club. This happened in the church. This is a church lesson. And so Jesus finds him outside the church. Jesus introduces himself to him outside the church. Jesus is praised by this man outside the church. And that's how Jesus leads into I am the good shepherd. My sheep hear my voice. The man heard him before he saw him. Sheep don't see well. Now you understand how sheep and the blind men work together? Sheep are blind, functionally blind. Sheep literally eat themselves lost. They can only see a few inches beyond their noses. And if you get them far away from the voice that they're known by, they can't find their way back by sight because their sight is so poorly. And that's how come you can run sheep off a cliff, because sheep don't see far enough ahead of themselves to know there's a cliff ahead of them. Blind man, sheep. My sheep hear my voice. Blind man heard the voice. My sheep know me. The man knew. Whether he's a prophet or not, I don't know. Where he comes from, I don't know. One thing I know. I was blind. I was blind. Now I see. My sheep hear my voice and follow me. Remember what the blind man asked the folks who were worrying him? You keep asking me about him. Do you want to be his follower too? Do you want to be his follower too? And so I'll just end on that question. Do you want to be his follower too? Do you want to be his follower too? Do you want to follow the one who is outside the church? Hello? Yet loving and showing the works of God. The works of God don't happen inside pews. They happen inside lives. The works of God don't happen inside systems. They happen inside souls. The works of God don't happen inside rules. They happen inside relationships. And when God works, God heals souls. God heals relationships. God heals lives. And whenever God heals and we respond, we follow. Because that's what sheep do. My sheep hear my voice. By the way, these aren't the only sheep I have. I have some other sheep, because there's a whole lot of folks who've been put out. Amen. But they need a shepherd. Jesus can work it out. 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 All right.
Work it out. Work it out.